If this deal doesn't go through, you know exactly where your future's headed, Bryce muttered. I didn't respond. I just kept my eyes on Mr. Faizan, who was stirring his tea like the future of both our companies was sitting right there in that cup. Because maybe it was. The air inside the 47th floor conference room of the Al Masari Tower felt too still, like it was holding its breath. 12 men in tailored dishdashas sat in silence, their eyes fixed on me, measured, unreadable. The glass wall behind them framed the rising sun, bleeding gold across the Dubai skyline. But inside, nothing moved. I adjusted my blazer sleeve with care I didn't feel. Operational autonomy, I said evenly, switching to Arabic, letting the vowels flow slow and warm. Must be preserved in local branches. That's non-negotiable. Across the polished marble table, Mr. Omar Faizan, COO of Al Sierra Group, stirred his cardamom tea with the elegance of a man who never rushed. He didn't respond. He didn't need to. I knew better than to fill silence. Instead, I breathed. Quiet. Deep. Invisible. Beneath the surface, tension coiled around my ribs like wire. 11 months of negotiation. 4 countries. 3 currencies. And all of it led here. One wrong word. One clumsy metaphor. And it would all unravel. My earpiece buzzed. A voice, soft and breathy. My father. You don't have to call back, D, just... I wanted to say the flowers outside the rehab window bloomed this morning, same yellow ones your mom loved. The message was from 3 days ago. I hadn't listened. I hadn't had time. Now it played on loop, while I spoke about regulatory structure and phased rollouts in perfect Arabic. I heard his voice in one ear, fading. Then the door clicked. The spell broke. Bryce Langston, Vice President of Global Strategy, walked in like he owned the air. 23 minutes late. No apology, just that swagger. An expensive suit. The smile of a man who never earned the room, but always assumed it was his. He didn't bow, didn't greet, just nodded toward me and said in English, "Hope I didn't miss the fireworks." I didn't flinch, but Mr. Faizan paused his stirring. One of his associates shifted slightly. The air curdled. Just a little. "Mr. Langston," I said in Arabic, still looking at Faizan. "Welcome," Bryce chuckled and took the empty chair beside me, tapping the table twice like he was ordering at a bar. He pulled out his tablet, scanned the agenda, and whispered, loud enough for only me to hear, "Hope you didn't lock us into anything too soft. Delia, these guys look polite, but that doesn't mean they'll play fair." He smirked. I didn't look at him, but I felt the floor shift beneath us, like the game had just changed, and I wasn't sure which of us was the target. We were just getting into the amended compliance schedule when Bryce cleared his throat. Loudly, too loudly, Mr. Faizan had just placed his teaspoon down, nodding faintly as I outlined the projected 3-phase integration model, each section aligned with Al-Sara's regional governance requirements. I had spent 7 weeks tailoring the language for this very moment. There was only 1 paragraph left. Then Bryce interrupted. "I think this is a good point to pause," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Before we go further, I want to share a quick update on our side." I kept my hand still over the contract binder. I didn't say a word. He stood up. Not slowly, not tentatively, just stood, as if he were announcing something routine, as if we weren't sitting in front of the most influential client in the region. "Effective immediately," he said, voice too cheerful. "Delia will no longer be continuing in her current role with Venturon. As part of our broader strategic alignment, she's been sunset, not fired, not transitioned, sunset. Like I was a color scheme being quietly phased out for a newer, more modern palette. I felt the words hit before I could fully process them. Felt the temperature in the room shift by a single invisible degree. felt the breath catch in the throat of someone across the table. But I didn't react, not outwardly. My eyes remained on the binder, then slowly lifted to meet Mr. Faison's. His teacup was still in his hand, motionless now. One of his deputies blinked, glancing at me, then at Bryce, then back again, searching for a signal. Bryce sat down again like nothing had happened. "Of course, our team remains fully committed to this partnership," he added breezily, "and I'll be taking over lead communications moving forward." There it was. The trap sprung, public, clean, final. I didn't speak right away, instead. I inhaled through my nose, once, silent, deliberate. I could still smell the cardamom from the tea, the faint antiseptic of the polished table. The hum of the ceiling vent seemed louder than before. I reached into my folder and gently closed the binder. Then I turned, very slightly, to face Mr. Faison and his team, and I spoke in Arabic. "Apologies for the interruption. I understand this may raise concerns." Every Alsara executive turned toward me, as if gravity had shifted. "My formal role may have changed," I continued, still calm, still measured. "But I am available to continue this negotiation as an independent consultant. My terms are simple: 10%, success-based, payable upon execution." There was a pause. A long one. One of the men at the far end of the table exhaled through his nose. Another adjusted his pen, but said nothing. Mr. Faison didn't blink. He watched me the way a man watches a chessboard just before the move that changes the game. Bryce opened his mouth to speak. Too late. Faison placed his cup down, slowly, and looked not at Bryce, but at me. "That," he said, also in Arabic, "may be a very wise option." I didn't smile, but inside, something shifted. Not pride, not revenge, just certainty, and from that moment on, the meeting belonged to me. I didn't slam the door, I didn't storm out, didn't throw a glance over my shoulder, didn't flinch when Bryce gave the Alsara team a salesman's smile like nothing had just detonated in the middle of the room. I simply stood, gathered my folder, and walked out, my heels silent against the marble floors of the 47th floor. The private lounge down the hall was empty. Floor-to-ceiling glass let in the early afternoon haze of Dubai's sun, casting sharp shadows across the white leather chairs. I sat in the far corner and placed the binder on the table. My fingers hovered over it for a moment, then pulled away like the surface might burn. I still hadn't looked at my phone. Not since this morning. Not since the moment I decided today wasn't about what I might lose, but what I could take back. It buzzed the second I unlocked it. Santianin 71. Private contact incoming call. I paused. Took a breath. Answered. "Ms. Monroe?" said a low voice, precise and deliberate. "This is Yusuf Ghanem, legal advisor for Alsara Group. I've been asked to reach out discreetly." My heart didn't skip. My jaw didn't tighten. I just adjusted in the chair, crossing one leg over the other. "I'm listening. We've been briefed on today's development," he continued, "and Mr. Faison would like to engage you separately, through an independent agreement. Should you be available?" I nodded to no one, staring at the skyline. My reflection looked back at me in the glass, composed, small, and sharp-edged. "I'm available," I said. "I can have terms to you within the hour." There was a pause. "Do you have a legal entity in place?" I looked down at the folder. Inside was a single-page document I had printed 3 weeks ago. The name across the top was clean and direct: Monroe Global Solutions. Singapore registered, no website, no logo, no digital footprint, only a post office box, a client contract template, and a shelf corporation I quietly acquired through a third-party legal channel. "I do," I said. "I'll activate it today." "Excellent," he replied. "Expect a secure line from my office before 6:00 p.m. The call ended. I stared at the blank screen for a moment longer. The silence felt different now, Not empty, just waiting. I reached for my laptop. It took 14 minutes to initiate the offshore registration key and notify the Singapore Corporate Registry. 7 more to configure the secure Proton Mail domain and update the encrypted payment gateway. No fanfare, no LinkedIn post, no public pivot, just motion. Quiet. Absolute motion. Monroe Global was alive. By the time I zipped the laptop shut, the sun had shifted again. Angles longer now, slicing the white chairbacks into geometric patterns. I leaned back, letting it hit my face. I didn't close my eyes. Not yet. Then my phone buzzed again. This time, a text. Katie, former assistant, 1:42 p.m. You didn't hear this from me, but they planned it. There's a group thread, strategy alignment only. You weren't on it. They've been talking about replacing you since Tokyo. I stared at the message for a long time. Katie had started as an intern. First to arrive, last to leave. She once stayed until midnight just to finish translating a regulatory addendum I needed before a 6 a.m. flight to Zurich. She'd brought coffee to my desk more times than I could count. Always black, no sugar. Now she was on the outside too. I typed back, "Thank you. Be careful." My thumb hovered for a beat. Then I added, "You were never invisible." Send. Somewhere behind me, I heard footsteps. A door opening. Bryce's voice laughing. Too loud. Too fake. Trying to hold a room that no longer held him. Let him laugh. He thought I walked out to lick my wounds. He thought I'd disappear. But I wasn't retreating. I was repositioning. And he just watched me do it. Without ever realizing the ground beneath him had already shifted. The first thing I did after activating Monroe Global wasn't to send proposals or call investors. It was to open my archive. I hadn't touched it since the title shift 6 weeks ago, the moment I was quietly moved from VP of Strategic Development to Senior Advisor, Regional Liaison. The change had come via calendar invite. No context, no announcement, not even a conversation, just a line on the org chart and a new color code in our project software. I remembered sitting at my desk that morning in Dubai, blinking at the reissued credentials. I had stared at the internal dashboard for 10 minutes, unsure if it was a mistake. Then I'd opened Outlook and typed the subject line carefully. Subject. Title adjustment. Contractual clarification request. It had gone to Human Resources, with Legal and Bryce CC'd. Polite, direct, professional, no emotion, just structure. I had asked for documentation reflecting any changes to scope, authority, or termination terms based on the title shift. I had even included the original contract PDF for reference. They hadn't replied. I followed up 4 days later. Then again 10 days after that. Still nothing. Now, sitting in the quiet of the lounge with a fresh legal retainer in play, I opened the folder labeled Contractual Title Revision on my encrypted drive. Everything was there, time-stamped, archived, signed. I scrolled through the email thread. Heart steady. This wasn't revenge, it was record-keeping. I found the follow-up message I'd sent on a Friday evening, 9:30 p.m. local time, after another full week without response. It read, "Hi, team. Looping back on this. Still waiting on confirmation regarding updated contractual status based on new title issued. Please confirm if documentation is being processed." Then came the kicker. 2 days later. A reply. From Bryce. Short. Dismissive. CC'd only to our HR liaison. "I'll handle Delia's file personally. No need to involve legal. Just cut access and loop me when it's done." That was it. No greeting, no rationale, just instructions. I stared at it now, not with anger, not with shock, but with the kind of detachment that made everything suddenly feel weightless. They didn't just forget to process my exit. They decided not to. Not legally, not properly, not at all. And in doing so, they'd severed the one thing that might have protected them: formal boundaries. I opened Slack next and navigated to the private channel where I'd pinged Bryce the week the change occurred. "Hi, quick follow-up, Title change and how it affects client authority chain. Want to ensure compliance stays intact. He'd left it on red. No reply. No emoji. Just digital silence. But the log was still there. The metadata, too. Audit traceable. I clicked into our internal DocuSign system and reviewed the latest version of my contract, still under the original VP designation. Still active. The line about severance was intact. The clause about role reassignment requiring written approval? Untouched. In less than 20 minutes. I had reassembled the full picture. Not a broken contract, not a breach. Just absence. Bryce hadn't sunset me. He'd skipped the sunset entirely. No formal termination. No exit memo. No signed NDA. No non-compete. They hadn't let me go. They had simply removed my keycard and hoped I wouldn't notice. I zipped everything into a clean, time-stamped archive and labeled it Monroe Ridge Exit Gap Breach v1.zip. Then I sent it, encrypted, to my private legal counsel, with one line in the body, confirming absence of formal offboarding. See thread attached. Full package follows. The moment I hit send, something settled in my chest. Not relief. This wasn't over. Not pride. It wasn't won. It was colder than that. Cleaner. It was the feeling of finally knowing, of watching their negligence turn into my leverage, of holding their silence in one hand, and my evidence in the other. And this time, I wasn't waiting for permission. It started with a whisper. No press release. No dramatic LinkedIn announcement. No glossy rebranding or triumphant, I'm thrilled to share word post. Just a white paper. 8 pages. Sharp, technical, clean. Co-authored anonymously. Distributed quietly through an encrypted PDF link sent from a Proton Mail address that didn't have a name attached. Only initials. MGS. Monroe Global Solutions. The paper laid out an adaptive logistics model for multi-regional partnerships, incorporating multilingual AI integration protocols, risk mitigation tiers, and a phased stakeholder communication strategy tailored to Southeast Asia. Everything I had built at Venturon, restructured from the ground up. Everything they had ignored when they called me too cautious, too local, too slow. I sent it to 3 former clients. Not with a pitch, not even with a signature, just the file. And a line. You once said this problem hadn't been solved yet. Maybe now it has. The first reply came within 24 hours, from a COO in Manila. Short. 3 words. Can we talk? That was all I needed. By 9:00 a.m. the next morning, I had a virtual call scheduled, disguised as a vendor-neutral strategy session. By 2:15 p.m., I had a verbal agreement that Monroe Global would audit their regional AI licensing procedures. No paperwork, no logo. Just an NDA and a bank transfer routed through Singapore. And then the real work began. I created a second address, then a third, each tied to a different alias, each linked to a different client sector: tech, supply chain, financial services. All roads led back to me. But no one saw it, because I wasn't making noise. I wasn't setting fires. I was rerouting pipelines, and Venturon never noticed. They were too busy rebuilding decks, scheduling cultural fluency trainings, and rolling out Bryce's flashy new APAC playbook that had more emojis than data. I didn't watch. I didn't need to. I had my eyes on the people who mattered, and I knew their pain points better than anyone, because I had been the one who documented them, solved for them, and flagged them before Bryce ever learned how to pronounce Alsara. That week, I sent out 5 more papers, then 3 emails, then a strategic memo written in both English and Japanese. I didn't ask for anything, I just solved problems. And the clients responded, some with questions, some with caution. But one didn't hesitate. The Japanese firm had been one of Venturon's earliest APAC partners. I had spent 2 years building that relationship from a polite handshake to a multi-million-dollar implementation contract. I knew their team, I knew their board, I knew what they cared about. They had gone quiet after Bryce's takeover. No official withdrawal, just silence. Until now, on a humid Thursday morning, at 7:30 a.m., I checked my encrypted inbox and saw the subject line, MGS, RE, Logistics Alignment Paper, Immediate Action. The message was short. Attached was a signed engagement letter. They wanted Monroe Global to begin work within 10 business days. No call, no questions, just trust. Because they didn't need to ask who had written the white paper. They knew. They knew the cadence, the logic, the intentional structure of every sentence. They knew I spoke their language, literally and strategically. I stared at the signed letter for a long moment, not smiling, not surprised, just angry, cold, strategic anger. The kind of anger that doesn't burn. It plans. They had erased me publicly. Now I was rebuilding privately, and for every contract they thought they owned. I was now writing the next chapter under a different name. I picked up my phone, opened a secure contact list, and tapped the name of a Korean trade executive I hadn't spoken to in over a year. The message I typed was simple. You once told me you wanted out of your current platform. I think now's the time. Quietly. Send. Let Venturon have their slide decks and their borrowed lingo. Let Bryce talk louder to mask what he couldn't read. I wasn't going to war. I was already winning it. They just hadn't seen the battlefield yet. It took less than 5 days for Venturon to pretend nothing had happened. By the following Monday, I got word that they'd rolled out a formal client announcement. New regional lead for strategic partnerships, Asia Pacific. A banner went up on their website, a stock photo, a corporate bio, a new name, Laura Beasley. I remembered Laura. I'd met her once during a global offsite in Lisbon. She was from the London office, nice enough, sharp with numbers, even sharper with opinions about how inefficient translation layers slow down global deals. Her Arabic vocabulary extended to falafel and shukrain, both of which she mispronounced with confidence. She had never worked in APAC. She had never once traveled to Dubai, but she had an MBA and the trust of Bryce Langston. So naturally, she became my replacement. Her first outreach went out in a blast email from the new regional strategy alias, laura.b@venturon.global. The subject line was a masterpiece of clueless ambition. Excited to partner with you across cultures and opportunities. I nearly choked on my jasmine tea. Inside was a message littered with buzzwords. Synergy, cross-border alignment, next-gen optimization, with one glaring omission, my name. Not even a passing reference. It was as if I had never been there. As if the bridges I had built, the contracts I had secured, the trust I had earned, had all just sprouted out of a PowerPoint slide. But the clients remembered, and they noticed. I didn't have to guess. Word travels fast when people feel slighted. By 10:45 a.m., I received a forwarded message from a contact inside a logistics firm in Jakarta. Laura's first official intro call had ended in confusion. She'd referred to the wrong honorifics. She'd interrupted a regional chair mid-sentence. She had closed the call by saying, "Looking forward to shaking hands in person," to a team that had already gone remote 2 years ago. 2 days later, another message, this time from a former Alsara deputy. She opened with a joke about camel speeds in a negotiation meeting. But of course, internally, Venturon had other explanations. They didn't blame Laura. They didn't even mention me. They blamed market volatility. Post-pandemic shifts. A short-term alignment gap. They held a virtual town hall on Friday. I watched a recording someone shared, because of course someone shared it. Bryce wore a deep blue blazer and smiled too much. He used phrases like global recalibration and a moment of exciting transition. No one looked excited. They looked tired, tense, cornered. But the best moment, the one I actually replayed twice, came at the very end. During the Q&A, a junior associate from the Singapore office raised a hand on the call. She asked if the company had received any response from Trinetica, a major AI integration firm we had worked with for years. Bryce blinked. "We're still waiting for follow-up," he said. "We expect them to re-engage once we share the updated roadmap." What he didn't know, what no one in that room knew, was that I had already received Trinetica's response. It had come to my encrypted inbox the day before. At 3:08 p.m., signed by the COO himself. "At this time, we are pausing our re-engagement with Venturon. We would prefer to explore further no flattery, no soft letdown, just a redirection." They didn't even pretend to want Venturon anymore. They wanted me, and they weren't alone. I looked at the message, reread the sentence 3 times, then filed it away. I didn't answer right away. Not because I was uncertain, but because timing matters. Venturon was unraveling, one botched email at a time, and they still hadn't realized it wasn't the competition eating their market share. It was the woman they forgot to legally terminate. Let them keep speaking louder, faster, with more graphs and video calls and culture decks. I didn't need to raise my voice. I just needed to wait. I hadn't seen Martin Kessler in almost 7 years. Not since the early days, when I still wore blazers 2 sizes too big and lived on espresso and PowerPoint. Back when strategic planning meant sleeping 4 hours a night and pitching to anyone who would listen. Martin had been one of the first people who did. We met at a conference in Singapore, back when Monroe Global wasn't even a dream, and I was just that American girl who speaks perfect Arabic. He'd sat in the back row of a breakout session, listened to my deck on cross-border licensing, and asked one question during Q&A that no one else had thought to ask. "Do you plan to stay corporate forever?" At the time, I'd laughed. I told him I liked stability. He'd smiled and said, "Stability doesn't scale, vision does." And now, 7 years later, I was back in Singapore, on the 42nd floor of the Shangri-La, in a quiet corner booth of the rooftop lounge, waiting for the man who'd once signed the first term sheet of my career. He arrived right on time, 4:30 p.m. sharp, same trim gray beard, same understated suit. But his walk had slowed, and his eyes looked heavier than I remembered. "Delia Monroe," he said, settling into the seat across from me. "You haven't changed." "I have," I replied quietly. "You just didn't get the press release." He chuckled, low and dry, then signaled for 2 black coffees, no sugar, no small talk, just like he used to. For the first few minutes, we didn't talk about the company. We talked about Lisbon, about those awful vending machine sandwiches from the early WeWork days, about how we both used to believe being the last one in the office meant something noble. "It didn't," he said flatly. "It just meant they didn't value your time." Then he pulled a slim leather folder from his bag and placed it between us. "I'm not here just to catch up," he said. "I've been hearing things, more than rumors." He opened the folder slowly. Inside were screenshots, memos, internal emails, some of them marked confidential, others forwarded anonymously, names I recognized, subjects I didn't. "Whistleblower," Martin said simply. "From inside Venturon, legal team member, junior, been leaking documents for 2 weeks now." I skimmed through one thread. Internal projections falsely inflated. Client contract renewals marked secured with no signatures. Discussions about massaging Q4 performance reports. "This one," he said, tapping a page, "shows your termination wasn't documented properly. They thought that would protect them. Turns out, it might bury them." My throat felt tight, but I didn't show it. Instead, I leaned back and asked, "Why are you bringing this to me?" Martin looked at me for a long time. His gaze wasn't hard, but it was weighted, with something between disappointment and hope. "Because they've triggered an internal ethics review," he said. "Investors are demanding it, and your name's come up, a lot." I nodded once. Of course it had, he continued. They'll want testimony from someone who was there, someone who saw the shift, the manipulation, the erasure. I stayed silent. Let the sentence breathe, he added, more gently this time. You don't owe them anything, but you might owe yourself the right to say it out loud. Across the city, lights were flicking on, buildings illuminating, piece by piece. I watched their reflections dance in his coffee cup. I haven't given public statements, I said. No press, no interviews. I've kept my head down. I know, he said. That's why they believe you. There it was. The truth. It wasn't just about revenge or exposure. It was about narrative control. They had written me out of the company I helped build, and now I had the chance to write myself back in, not as a victim, but as a witness. I looked down at the folder, then at him. When? Martin smiled, small, approving. Tuesday, 9 a.m. They won't see you coming. And for the first time in weeks, I felt something move beneath the weight of everything I'd held in. Not relief, not rage, just a quiet, aching recognition that maybe I wasn't done yet. The message came through at 2:08 a.m. Encrypted, single-use inbox. No name, just a subject line. Heads up, they're scrambling. I opened it in my office at home, a minimalist corner in my Singapore apartment, lit only by the soft blue glow of the monitor. The Marina Bay skyline shimmered behind me like static. The message body was short. Bryce is trying to retrofile an NDA and non-compete. He's pushing to backdate it. Watch your 6. No signature, just a timestamp. 1:58 a.m. Boston time. I didn't pause to panic. I didn't wonder who sent it. That didn't matter right now. I minimized the email and launched the drive. I'd kept everything: emails, PDFs, legal memos, onboarding materials, exit pings, stored offline and double-backed on a mirror drive locked in a steel drawer beneath my desk. Nothing in the cloud, nothing touchable, not anymore. I pulled up a folder labeled Venturon HR Access Metadata Chain and started scrolling. Each file had a numerical code, a timestamp, a sender ID, and an access log. I filtered by date, 6 weeks prior, then by subject line, title change, and exit processing, then by user activity. It was all there. My initial HR request for contract clarification, marked pending. My follow-up, still unopened. Slack messages to the compliance liaison, read, not acknowledged. And then Bryce's reply. I opened it again, even though I had it memorized. I'll handle Delia's file personally. No need to involve legal. Just cut access and loop me when it's done. It hadn't looped anyone. No documents had been filed. No system updates. Just a line of text. And then, silence. I kept digging. In the access logs, I found the audit trail. HR had logged into my personnel file at 4:41 p.m. on a Thursday, made no changes, and logged out. Then, 3 days later, Bryce accessed the same folder from his company laptop. But here's where it got interesting. The system flagged a deletion attempt at 5:03 p.m. It was logged, but not completed. Why? Because the file he tried to delete, Monroe Wa Exit Packet PDF, didn't exist. It had never been created. I cross-checked system activity against the user manual I had quietly downloaded from our compliance database months before. According to the guide, exit packets had to be generated by HR, verified by legal, and approved by a third-party auditor. Without those 3 steps, nothing was legally binding. Bryce had tried to delete a file that wasn't there. He'd assumed someone else had done it. He hadn't followed up. He hadn't confirmed. He'd just moved on, with his ego and a fake sense of finality. I sat back in my chair, not satisfied, not angry, focused, like a surgeon tracing the artery before the incision. They thought I was operating without a net, But the truth was simpler than that. They never built the net in the first place. I opened my secure email client and composed 2 messages. The first went to Alina Basha, my legal counsel. Subject: attempted backdated NDA. See attached. Archive shows no executed NDA, non-compete, or exit doc. System logs confirm no processing. Bryce attempted to delete non-existent file. Evidence attached. The second email was addressed to a new contact. Subject: timeline confirmed. You mentioned Tuesday. I'll be there. Full digital archive in hand. Sigh. I attached a zipped file labeled exit gap, chart chain complete, lav v2, zip. Then, I encrypted the entire folder and moved a copy to a cold storage drive in a fireproof lockbox under my desk. Let them draft retroactive contracts. Let them write memos in panic. I wasn't worried about their words. I had the data, I had the proof, I had the logs, and I had something they didn't. Discipline. Because the most dangerous thing about a woman you erase too soon is that she doesn't rush to scream. She sharpens her silence and waits for the cut. By 8:12 a.m., I was ready. No more searching, no more organizing, no more double-checking what I already knew. Everything was in place: email chains, access logs, time-stamped Slack threads, unread follow-ups, and the most damning detail of all, the system confirmation that no non-compete, NDA, or termination file bearing my name had ever existed inside Venturon's database. The question was no longer if they had failed. The only question now was who I would show it to first. I opened my secure laptop and pulled up 2 blank emails. The first was addressed to Alina Basha, my attorney. The subject line was already typed. Subject: formal escalation, exit documentation breach. The body was short, clinical, precise. Full archive attached, metadata confirmed, no legal termination executed, deletion attempt logged by non-HR personnel, all files verified and backed up. I attached the encrypted folder and hovered over the send button just long enough to inhale once, then clicked. Done. Then came the second message. This one carried more weight, not legally, narratively. It was addressed to Natalie Hang, senior reporter at Businessweek, and one of the few journalists in the industry who still knew the difference between scandal and structure. Natalie had reached out once, months ago, when rumors began circling about an exodus inside Venturon's APAC division. At the time, I declined to comment. There was nothing to gain from speaking before I had leverage, before the story had a spine. Now it did, and it was sharp. Subject: off the record. For now, I'm prepared to talk. Attached is a timeline with redacted documentation, full names available pending verification. I'm not looking for revenge. I'm looking for accuracy. You'll find email logs, calendar conflicts, proof of internal manipulation, and system evidence that my termination was never processed. If you're ready to write this, I'll open the rest. I hit send. No BCCs, no dramatics, just clarity. Then I sat back and waited. Not long. At 9:01 a.m., Alina replied with a single sentence. We're covered. Let them come. And at 10:43 a.m., Natalie responded. I've heard whispers, but this is a bonfire. Let's set up a call. By 11:15 a.m., we were on a secure video line. Natalie looked exactly as I remembered. Sharp eyes, soft voice, not easily impressed. She didn't open with questions. She opened with gratitude. Then she asked for the full archive. I gave it to her. Not to weaponize, to document. She listened more than she spoke, which is how I knew she was serious when we hung up. She said one last thing. This won't feel like a bomb when it hits. It'll feel like someone finally turned on the lights. I closed my laptop and went for a walk. No headphones, no distractions. Just the soft hum of Singapore's morning traffic and the certainty of motion. By 1:56 p.m., the first signal arrived. Not an article, not a headline, a whisper. An internal group chat message forwarded from a trader friend at a hedge fund in New York. Anyone else seeing this Business Week leak? If it's true, Venturon's audit risk is nuclear. Another message from a VC associate in Hong Kong. Unpublished headline draft floated. Inside the collapse at Venturon, silence, strategy, and the ghost who never left. It hadn't even gone live, but it had already been passed, screenshot, dissected, and flagged by 3 different financial compliance teams across 3 time zones. They were calling it a controlled leak. I called it proof of interest. This wasn't a rage drop. It wasn't a media stunt. It was pressure. The kind of pressure you apply not to explode a system, but to reveal the cracks it's already hiding. Venturon had built their structure on speed, ego, and assumption. Now those assumptions were bleeding through investor Slack channels, boardroom group texts, and inboxes that no longer forwarded Bryce's bulletins. No one had contacted me for comment yet. They would. Eventually. But they'd be too late, because the narrative had already shifted. Not when the article published, not when the lawyers panicked, but now, when the story existed quietly in the shadows, where truth always starts. And I wasn't the villain. I wasn't even the victim. I was the architect, and they were only just beginning to realize whose blueprint they'd built their collapse on. By 9:30 a.m., the boardroom at Venturon's global headquarters was full. Bryce Langston stood at the head of the table, sleeves rolled, voice calm, eyes a little too wide. The large screen behind him displayed a sleek presentation, gradient slides, vague graphs, and just enough movement to distract from the fact that nothing was being said. "Let me be clear," he said, clicking to the next slide. "What we're experiencing is a moment of recalibration. Our core metrics remain intact. Our expansion playbook is solid, and we are actively engaging with alternative narratives in the media." Alternative narratives. He meant the leak, the forwarded headline, the whispers that had turned into warning calls from 3 of Venturon's top 5 clients. He moved quickly, launching into a paragraph of buzzwords that somehow included synergistic correctional momentum, stakeholder-first agility, and localized cadence integrity. A few board members shifted in their seats. One rubbed his temple. Martin Kessler sat 2 seats down from the head, silent until now. Then, just as Bryce transitioned to a slide titled Rebuilding Trust Through Transparent Realignment, Martin raised one hand, calm, casual, surgical. "I'd like to ask a question," he said, voice low and steady. Bryce blinked. "Of course. Martin, go ahead." Martin didn't ask. He reached down, pulled a thick paper folder from his leather briefcase, and slid it across the table to the chairwoman at the end. A second copy followed, this time to the compliance officer on his left. The sound of paper shifting filled the room like static. "These are hard copies of internal documentation confirming that Ms. Monroe, your former regional director, was never formally offboarded. No NDA, no non-compete, no HR confirmation. We have access logs, system metadata, and Slack transcripts to verify the claim." Bryce paled. Those records aren't final. There were back-end updates that hadn't been logged." Martin didn't blink. "You attempted to delete a non-existent termination packet. Bryce, that's not a back-end error. That's an operational lie." The room went still. The chairwoman looked at the files, then at Bryce. Then she turned to the head of investor relations. "Have we confirmed this?" He nodded once. "As of this morning, yes. The logs match exactly." Bryce opened his mouth. No words came out. From the far end of the table, a voice cut through the silence. It was Harold Lynn, one of the company's oldest board members. He rarely spoke in meetings, but when he did, everyone listened. "She's doing the job we paid for," he said quietly. "Just without the burden of your incompetence." Bryce flinched. No one laughed. Because it wasn't a joke. The files were real. The damage was measurable. The silence in the room was heavier than any presentation could soften. Martin leaned back in his chair. This isn't just a legal risk. It's a leadership failure. And every client who walks out with Monroe is a direct reflection of that. No rebuttal, no defense, just Bryce standing alone. The screen behind him still flashing words like resilience and vision. But no one was reading anymore, because the room had shifted. And for the first time since her erasure, Delia Monroe wasn't just mentioned, she was respected. By 7:05 a.m. The article went live. No teaser, no rollout, no pre-embargo leak this time. Just a simple title on the front page of Businessweek Digital, with a headline that didn't pull punches. The Ghost in the Server, How Venturon Erased a Director and Triggered a Collapse. The piece was sharp. Natalie Hang had woven it with surgical restraint. No fluff, no dramatics, just screenshot after screenshot, file metadata, Slack transcripts, time-stamped legal omissions, and a single redacted exit attempt marked incomplete. Each paragraph tightened the noose, not around a person, but around a system built on assumption. Within the first 10 minutes, I received 12 emails. Within 30, the article had been reposted to 3 separate financial analysis boards. By 8:20 a.m., it was trending on LinkedIn under Tarn Venturon Collapse. The stock market opened at 9:30 a.m. By 9:42, Venturon's shares had dropped 11%. By 10:07, it was 17.3%, triggering a level 1 volatility pause on the New York Stock Exchange. Trading froze. Panic didn't. Screenshots from the article flooded internal channels. Compliance officers were tagged. Legal teams were looped. Clients began sending formal notices of pause, review, or complete disengagement. The first came from Trinetica, then Kenzai Holdings, then Alsara Group. Each one echoed the same language. We are suspending our engagement pending full investigation and alignment with Monroe Global. Yes. They said it. Monroe Global. Not as a leak, not as an aside, but as a new entity. A choice. By 11:15 a.m., someone updated the Monroe Global website. Simple, white background, nothing flashy, just a message in crisp font. We do not disrupt. We replace what was never stable. I hadn't written it, but I understood it. That was the twist no one saw coming. This wasn't revenge. This was infrastructure. Monroe Global wasn't a headline-grabbing startup. It didn't pitch VC decks or hire evangelists. It was quiet, modular, multilingual, built in the silence between betrayal and reinvention. And now? It wasn't just real. It was relevant. I didn't give interviews that day. I didn't retweet. I didn't email Bryce. I didn't call Martin. I sat in a cafe in Tanjong Pagar at 12:02 p.m., watching people refresh their screens as numbers ticked downward. A group of consultants behind me whispered about that ghost exec who was never technically fired. They didn't know I was sitting 10 feet away. I liked it that way. Let them imagine what they wanted. Because I wasn't the story. The system was. Venturon had built itself on buzzwords, shortcuts, and unchecked loyalty, and it had cost them not just market confidence, but something harder to buy back, credibility. Meanwhile, the market didn't see Monroe Global as a disruptor anymore. They saw proof of concept, not chaos, stability. Natalie's article had ended on a quote I hadn't remembered giving her, but one I stood by. The truth doesn't require noise. It just requires enough people to stop looking away. That was all it took. Not fury, not pity, just truth, plainly stated, and allowed to land exactly where it hurt. And in that space, the vacuum left by panic, something else had room to grow. Not a comeback, not even a revenge arc. Just the quiet acknowledgement that some foundations are only visible once everything else falls apart. The room was smaller than I expected. No glass wall, No panoramic view. Just a long cedarwood table, warm lighting, and a white porcelain tea set already arranged with surgical precision. 3 cups. One for me, one for Mr. Faizan, one for his general counsel. No assistant, no interpreter, no Bryce. By 9:15 a.m. The final contract sat in front of me, printed, bound, and untouched. I didn't reach for it yet. I let the silence sit, exactly as I had weeks ago in that other meeting room, when my name had been erased mid-sentence and replaced with a smirk. But today was different, because today, no one would interrupt me. Mr. Faizan leaned forward, folding his hands together in that deliberate way I'd come to understand wasn't just habit, it was calculation. 3 phases, he said, speaking in Arabic. 6 countries. You'll coordinate hiring, localization, and legal structuring unilaterally. I nodded once. And discretion? He smiled. Built into the contract. His counsel slid the folder across the table. The new deal was triple the size of the original Venturon proposal, both in dollar value and strategic reach. And this time, I wasn't a facilitator. I wasn't an intermediary. I was the system. From legal to logistics, marketing to cybersecurity. The entire Asia-Pacific expansion would now run through Monroe Global. No committee, no oversight, just me. I opened the contract, scanned the familiar clauses, phased delivery, quarterly review, region-specific customizations, until I reached the final page. There it was, Clause 47C, sole strategic authority across APAC operations to be vested in Monroe Global, non-revocable upon activation. It wasn't a favor, it wasn't charity, it was recognition, earned not through noise, but through precision. I signed. Pen to paper, no flourish, no delay. Then I closed the binder and met Mr. Faizan's gaze. "We're honored to have you," he said, "but I have one question." I raised an eyebrow. "When your former employer hears this, what will you say?" I didn't hesitate. I didn't smirk. I simply reached into my memory and pulled the sentence that had hovered in my mouth weeks ago, but had never been spoken. Now. It was earned. I looked directly at him and answered, in Arabic, slowly, deliberately. "My consulting fee is now 10%, and I work for you. Shall we continue?" There was no applause, no camera flash, just the soft sound of a teacup being lifted, and the weight of 2 nods from across the table. That was all, but that was everything. Because this time, no one spoke over me, no one translated my voice, no one filtered, reframed, or claimed ownership of my work. I was no longer pitching, I was positioning. Venturon hadn't just lost a director. They had lost access to fluency, to nuance, to trust. And no corporate buzzword could rebuild that once it had been passed, quietly, to someone who had once been ignored in full view. I stepped out of the room at 10:02 a.m. The heat in Singapore was already climbing, but I felt nothing but cool air on my skin. I walked toward the curb, where my driver waited, holding the back door open. I didn't rush. Let the world spin. Let them chase damage control memos and investor calls. I had no need to shout. I had already signed the future, and this time, the name on the dotted line was mine.